Donkey Kong Country Returns HD was released on the Nintendo Switch this week to a lot of hype from fans of the series, making nearly all Donkey Kong titles available on the Switch. While I've spent a lot of time with Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. on NES, I never had a Super Nintendo or the Game Boy versions of the Donkey Kong Land series growing up, so I decided that it was time to revisit this revered series before trying out Donkey Kong Country Returns. So if you have the time, jump into a minecart and let's take a ride through the history of Donkey Kong and the amazing platformer series Rare helped craft before Donkey Kong Country Returns to the Nintendo Switch. First, a quick history lesson. The Donkey Kong series started in the arcades in 1981 with the original release of Donkey Kong. Created by the legendary Shigeru Miyamoto, it was a big hit for Nintendo and introduced gamers to classic characters like Donkey Kong, Mario, who was originally called Jumpman, and Pauline. In the game, Mario had to rescue Pauline from Donkey Kong, who had kidnapped her. The original Donkey Kong arcade game was a massive hit, and it was incredibly popular when it was released. It actually quickly became one of the top grossing arcade games of the early 80s, helping establish Nintendo as a major player in the video game industry. The game was not only a commercial success, but it also became a cultural icon, and it gave us Mario, who would go on to be the face of Nintendo, but unfortunately, that meant Donkey Kong was left behind in his shadow. Then, in 1982, Donkey Kong Jr. came out, and this time you played as Donkey Kong's son, trying to save Donkey Kong from Mario. It was a fun twist on the original, and I spent many hours playing Donkey Kong Jr. on my NES, and I still have so much fun sneaking in some sessions on the Nintendo Switch Online platform. In 1983, Donkey Kong 3 changed things up again, letting you play as Stanley, who had to fight off Donkey Kong and some pesky insects, which really didn't resonate with me, and would be the last we heard from Donkey Kong for a while. In 1994, 11 years after Donkey Kong 3, it would then fall to the developer Rare to bring the franchise back to life, and they did so in the form of Donkey Kong Country, moving the series to a side-scrolling platformer with phenomenal graphics, tight gameplay mechanics, and an absolute banger of a soundtrack composed by legendary composer David Wise. Donkey Kong Country would become the Super Nintendo's third best-selling game, shifting a whopping 9.3 million units, eclipsing A Link to the Past which moved 4.6 million units, and only falling behind Super Mario World and Super Mario All-Stars at 20.5 and 10.5 million units respectively. It took the Super Nintendo to the next level, featuring incredible pre-rendered 3D characters and utilizing the SNES Mode 7 graphics. Donkey Kong Country introduced new characters like Diddy Kong and a new narrative to the Donkey Kong series. I am in awe of how well Donkey Kong Country holds up, and it's so fun to play on Nintendo Switch Online with my retro controller. And despite it being released 31 years ago, I still have had so much fun and frustrations playing this incredible game. Releasing 6 months later, Donkey Kong Land on Game Boy would once again wow gamers and critics alike, seemingly doing the impossible by translating all the things that made Donkey Kong Country great and shrinking it onto the Game Boy system. While it took some liberties to fit on the system with different levels and structures to the SNES version, Donkey Kong Land would have some of its content go on to inspire settings and levels in future Donkey Kong Country series titles. I was pleasantly surprised with how well this translated over to the Game Boy. Diddy's Kong Quest was released on SNES towards the end of 1995, with Diddy as the main character, as well as a new playable character, Dixie Kong. While it was positively received by players, it didn't quite hit the sales of its predecessor, largely theorized to be due to a cartridge shortage, making obtaining a copy hard to come by. That being said, it's still often regarded as gamers' favourite in the series due to its unique level design and stellar soundtrack, as well as its improved graphics and gameplay mechanics. I didn't feel like Diddy's Kong Quest had the same impact on me as Country did, despite being bigger and better, but I can really appreciate the formula changes and interesting level design. Shortly after Diddy's Kong Quest was released, an accompanying title was released on the Game Boy in the form of Donkey Kong Land 2, based heavily on Diddy Kong's Quest. This game wasn't as positively received as other titles, mainly having to compromise on the improvements made with Diddy's Kong Quest. Still, I had a good time playing it on the Game Boy, and again, while not as impactful, was still great fun. 1996 saw the final Donkey Kong Country game on SNES come out, which was Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, putting the spotlight on Dixie and her cousin, Kiddy Kong. While not differing too much from the previous entries, Donkey Kong Country 3 didn't receive the critical acclaim of other previous entries, but it was praised for once again pushing the bar on graphics on what the Super Nintendo system could produce. While I was playing Donkey Kong Country 3, I did feel like it had a little bit of a shift in tone and I just couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it was still a fantastic game in its own right. The same can be said for Donkey Kong Land 3, which was originally released in 1997 following Dixie Kong's Double Trouble format. But it came along late in the Game Boy's life cycle and didn't really innovate enough to set it aside. It used similar levels from the SNES counterpart, but also had a lot of obvious compromises to translate it to the handheld system. And finally, we have the last entry that actually came after Donkey Kong Country Returns in the form of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. It was originally released on the Wii U in 2014, but Tropical Freeze was once again defrosted for the Nintendo Switch in a remaster in 2018. The game went back to Donkey Kong Country's roots with tight platforming and fast-paced timing throughout the vast levels that managed to expertly use 3D space in a 2D platformer. I picked this one up solely to prepare for Donkey Kong Country Returns, and if Returns is anything like Tropical Freeze, then I'm definitely in for a treat. The most surprising thing for me when experiencing this amazing franchise, with the SNES titles being completely new to me, is that the gameplay still holds up to this day. The games are bright and colourful while being deviously challenging. The minecart levels offer something truly unique and adrenaline pumping, and the series in general still has plenty to offer for gamers looking for a return to classic platforming action. I can't wait to play Donkey Kong Country Returns HD in the next few days. And while the title may suggest a return for many players, this particular gamer can't wait to experience the classic title for the first time. Thanks so much for watching my video. If you liked it, the best way you can support What's It Like is by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends. For more reviews, click on the thumbnails to the right, and for everything Nintendo, check out whatsitlike.com.au.